I have been working in this division for 31 years. 31 years of pulling testimonies from soldiers, officers, academy graduates, disaster survivors, and battlefield witnesses. I have read accounts of wars that lasted centuries. I have documented the fall of 3 star systems and the rebuilding of 2 more. I have sat across from admirals who wept quietly and soldiers who laughed nervously while describing things that should have broken them. I thought I had seen every kind of story this archive could hold. Then Incident GUMA Drill C9BZ441 landed on my desk, and I want to be honest with you. I read the initial summary twice before I called the lead investigator, just to confirm that the document was real. It was real. What you are about to read is not a military thriller. It is not a tale of heroism in the traditional sense. It is something stranger and, in my professional opinion, far more important. It is the story of a training exercise that was considered one of the most grueling survival drills in the Galactic Unified Military Academy's 200-year history. It is the story of 52 cadets from 14 different species who did not complete that drill. It is the story of what happened to them, what they experienced, and how their bodies and minds responded to an environment that the Academy's own designers called, in their original briefing documents, survivable under optimal physiological and psychological conditions. And it is the story of one cadet who not only completed the drill, but spent a portion of it sitting beside a thermal emitter eating reconstituted marshmallows, and, by multiple witness accounts, complaining that she had not been given enough of them. Her name is Cadet Marin Holloway. She is from Earth. I want to be careful here, because I have read a great deal of material about humans in the months since this incident came across my desk, and I have tried very hard to approach this documentation with the same neutrality I bring to every record. But I would be lying if I said that neutrality was easy to maintain, because the more I read, the more I found myself returning to a single question that I could not quite shake loose from my thinking. What kind of planet produces people like this? The answer, as best I can piece together from the biological reports, the geological surveys, the climate data, and the cultural anthropology files attached to this record, is a terrible one. A beautiful, chaotic, brutal, and wonderful one. A planet that is, by the Galactic Hazard Classification System, rated a Class 4 Deathworld. A designation that means, in practical terms, that most species in the galaxy would not survive on its surface for more than a few days without technological assistance. Humans have lived there for 200,000 years without technological assistance. They evolved there. I think about that a lot when I read Cadet Holloway's testimony. What follows is the full archival record of Incident GUMA Drill C9BZ441, compiled from witness testimonies, medical reports, instructor logs, environmental sensor data, and the cadet's own account. Names have been retained with permission. Nothing has been altered. Read it carefully. It tells you something important, not just about humans but about all of us. Senior Archivist Dalvin Merck, GUMA Historical Division, GSY 7204. Excerpted from GUMA Training Division Official Briefing Document, Cycle 441. Kesari 7 is the 5th moon of the gas giant Kesari in the Velthari system. It is tidally locked on its southern hemisphere and experiences extreme polar weather patterns on its northern face due to the interaction between Kesari's magnetic field and the moon's own thin atmosphere. The Northern Polar Training Grounds were established in GSY 7181 as a permanent cold-weather survival training facility after the Academy determined that standard simulation chambers, while useful for initial training, could not fully replicate the psychological and physiological stress of genuine low-temperature, high-wind environments. The polar grounds cover approximately 440 square kilometers of exposed terrain. Average winter temperature at the primary drill site, -62°C. Wind speeds during active storm conditions, 80 to 140 kilometers per hour. Visibility during peak blizzard, less than 3 meters. Class 9 Blizzard Drill, the designation used in this incident, is the Academy's highest-tier cold-weather survival exercise. It is not offered to first- or second-year cadets. Prerequisites include completion of Class 1 through Class 8 cold-weather modules, a passing score on the psychological resilience assessment, and a medical clearance from the Academy's physiological screening team. The drill has two primary objectives. First, cadets must survive a continuous 48-hour exposure period in the polar environment using only issued survival equipment. Second, cadets must maintain functional capacity, defined as the ability to perform basic navigation, communication relay tasks, and shelter construction throughout the exposure period. Failure criteria are clearly defined. A cadet who loses functional capacity, who becomes unable to perform the required tasks due to cold-induced physiological or psychological breakdown, is marked as a failure for the drill and extracted by the monitoring team. There is no shame designation attached to failure. The drill is designed to push cadets to and occasionally pass their limits for training purposes. Historically, failure rates in Class 9 Blizzard Drill range from 20 to 35%. In Cycle 441, Month 9, 53 cadets registered for the drill. Of those 53, 52 failed. The failure rate was 98.1%. That has never happened before in the drill's 63-year history. The one cadet who did not fail was Cadet Marin Holloway, Class Year 3, from Earth. Section 1.2, the Cadet Roster. Compiled from Academy registration records. The 53 cadets registered for the Cycle 441 Month 9 Class 9 Blizzard Drill came from 14 species across 9 star systems. For the purposes of this record, species names have been translated to their closest galactic standard equivalents where necessary. The species represented were as follows: Velhari 11 cadets, Drenosi 8 cadets, Umathi 7 cadets, Krelshan 5 cadets, Pelvari 4 cadets, Sonath 4 cadets, Thurvani 3 cadets, Omthri 3 cadets, Javarik 2 cadets, Sasali 2 cadets, Dorvik 1 cadet, Naumari 1 cadet, Rithali 1 cadet, and Human 1 cadet. Most of these species are cold tolerant to varying degrees. The Velhari, who are native to a temperate ice shelf world, are considered among the best cold weather species in the known galaxy. They can operate at temperatures as low as -80°C without thermal protection and have historically dominated Class 9 completion rates. The Drenosi and Umathi are similarly cold-adapted. The Krelshan, while not naturally cold-adapted, have a biological mechanism that allows them to slow their metabolic rate under extreme cold, effectively entering a low-consumption hibernation state that reduces exposure risk. On paper, this was one of the strongest rosters the Class 9 drill had ever seen. Cadet Marin Holloway, the single human registrant, was, by all standard metrics, the weakest candidate in the group. The human physiological file attached to her registration record listed the following relevant data points: species baseline cold tolerance, -12°C, unprotected; metabolic heat generation, above galactic average, but dependent on caloric intake; psychological resilience assessment score, 91 out of 100. Medical clearance, granted, with a notation from the screening physician that reads, in full, Cadet Holloway's thermal adaptation scores are below species average for most registered participants. Standard monitoring protocols should be maintained throughout the exercise. Note: Cadet Holloway requested that her ration pack include additional sugar-based confectionery items. This request was partially accommodated. That notation about confectionery items becomes relevant later. I want you to keep it in mind. Section 1.3, Pre-drill briefing. Audio log GUMA Polar Training Grounds. Briefing Chamber 4, Cycle 441. Month 9, Day 1, Hour 6. Drill Instructor Verksonek speaking. Going to keep this brief because you've all read the materials and you've all passed your prerequisites and I don't have time to repeat myself. 48 hours. You'll be dropped at staggered insertion points across grid sectors 7 through 14. You'll have your survival pack, your thermal layer, your comm relay unit, and your personal monitoring beacon. The monitoring team watches your vitals on a continuous feed. If your core temperature drops below species minimum threshold, or if your cognitive function assessment scores fall below operational baseline, we pull you out. That's the deal. No arguments, no negotiations, no second chances once the extraction call is made. Pause. Sonak, weather forecast for the next 48 hours is well, it's bad. I'll be honest with you. The meteorology team is calling it one of the harder storm windows we've had up here in about 3 years. Sustained winds, heavy particulate precipitation, visibility will be minimal for most of the period. This is not ideal. This is also not a reason to fail. You have your equipment, you have your training, and you have each other. Within the constraints of the drill's communication protocols, you are permitted to establish contact with other cadets for coordination purposes, but not for mutual warming assistance. Physical shared heat protocols are not permitted. Each cadet must survive on their own thermal capacity. Sound of shuffling, a voice from the group. Unidentified cadet, Instructor Sonak, what's the projected wind chill? Sonak -104 peak, around 40 hours in. Several seconds of silence. Sonak, is there anyone here who needs to hear that again? Silence. Sonak, good, gear check at 0700, insertion at 0800, questions. A pause. Then a different voice, lighter, casual, with a distinctive cadence that the audio analysts later identified as characteristic of Midwestern North American English. Cadet Holloway, yeah, quick question. The marshmallows in the ration pack, are they the big ones or the small ones? Longer silence. Sonak, I don't. Cadet Holloway, I'm not familiar with the Holloway, the confectionery items, the request I put in. I was told they'd be accommodated. I just want to know what size they sent because the big ones are better for morale. Sonak, I genuinely cannot answer that question. Holloway, fair enough. I'll find out when I open the pack. End of relevant audio segment. Section 1.4, The Insertion. From the mission log of Flight Technician Orvella Mon, GUMA Transport Division. We ran staggered insertions across a 4-hour window starting at 0800. The weather was already deteriorating when we began. By the time we hit the later insertion slots, visibility from the transport had dropped significantly, and we were running on instrument guidance only. I've done a lot of cold weather insertions. It's never pleasant. You open the bay door and the cold just comes in like something solid, like a wall you didn't see. Most cadets, even the experienced ones, go quiet when that happens. There's a moment where your body just registers the information, and your brain goes very still while it processes it. I ran 11 insertions that morning. The last insertion was Cadet Holloway's. I remember it specifically because she was the only one who didn't go quiet when the bay door opened. The wind came in. The temperature dropped in the bay to somewhere around -40 in about 4 seconds. I could feel it through my flight suit. And Cadet Holloway, who was standing at the insertion point with her pack on her back and her thermal layer sealed and her hood up, looked out at the white chaos of the polar ground below us and said, very clearly, "Oh, that's actually kind of pretty." Then she jumped. I watched her on the tracking feed for a few minutes after insertion. Her beacon was active, her vitals were nominal, and she was moving in a straight, purposeful line toward the first terrain feature on her sector map. I remember thinking that she seemed very calm for someone who was about to spend 48 hours in conditions that would kill most species in under 2 hours. I learned later that she had spent 20 minutes of the flight down looking at a small photograph she kept in a zip pocket on her sleeve, and that when one of the other cadets asked her what it was, she said it was a picture of her family's porch back home in Minnesota. I looked up Minnesota later. It snows there. Not like Kesari 7, nothing like Kesari 7, but still, it snows. I thought that was probably not a coincidence. Testimony, Cadet Yenev Dros Velhari, currently assigned GUMA Class Year 4. I want to start by saying that I am not embarrassed about what happened. I consulted with the Academy's Psychological Counseling Division afterward, and they were very clear that my response was physiologically appropriate given the conditions, and that the failure of a Velhari cadet in those conditions should not be read as a personal failure, but as evidence of how extreme the weather event actually was. I want to say that clearly because I think it needs to be on record. I was extracted at hour 4. I know it was early. It was look, I know how it sounds. Velhari are cold weather adapted. We have been for 100,000 years. Our homeworld, Veldaren, averages -30 during its winter months. I grew up in -30 winters. I thought I knew what cold was. I did not know what cold was. The wind on Kesari 7 at hour 4 of that drill was not a weather event. It was a physical force. It was like being hit repeatedly by something that had no edges and no shape, but was absolutely committed to taking you apart. My thermal layer was rated to -90. That should have been fine. That should have been more than adequate. It was not adequate. I found a terrain depression around hour 3 and attempted to construct a wind barrier using the materials in my survival pack. This is standard procedure. This is what we are taught. I got about 60% of the barrier constructed before the wind shifted direction by approximately 40 degrees and came around the side of the depression and hit me broadside at what the sensor data later showed was 112 kilometers per hour. I remember the sound. I remember being aware that the sound was very loud. I remember my comm relay unit producing a tone, and I knew what that tone meant. And I remember thinking very clearly, not yet. And then the next thing I remember is being inside the monitoring station with a thermal blanket around my shoulders and monitoring technician Seelith Orvan looking at me with an expression I recognized as professional concern. My core temperature had dropped below Velhari minimum threshold. The monitoring system had triggered an automatic extraction call. I had been in the drill for 4 hours and 3 minutes. I found out afterward that I was the first extraction. I found out much later that I was followed by 51 more over the next 38 hours. I also found out what was happening with Cadet Holloway during that time. I will be honest. When monitoring technician Orvan told me that the human cadet was still active and had, at last check, constructed a shelter and was, quote, making hot beverages and had apparently located her confectionery items and seemed in good spirits, I thought there had been an error. I thought the monitoring system was misidentifying the signal. I did not think a human was surviving in those conditions. No one thought a human was surviving in those conditions. Humans are not rated for this. Their cold tolerance is poor. Their thermal layer is the same as everyone else's, but their bodies don't generate the same baseline heat. They're warm-blooded, yes, but in the way that a small fire is warm-blooded, enough to heat a room, not enough to heat a storm. But the signal was correct. The human was still out there. Section 2.2. The storm intensifies. Environmental sensor log. Kesari 7 Polar Monitoring Array, Cycle 441, Month 9, Days 1 and 2. Hour 8, Wind speed 94 km/h. Temperature -71 degrees C. Visibility 2.1 meters. Particulate density above forecast threshold. Hour 12, Wind speed 107 km/h. Temperature -79 degrees C. Visibility 1.4 meters. Storm front stalled. Duration extension projected. Hour 18. Wind speed 118 km/h. Temperature -86 degrees C. Visibility 0.8 meters. Secondary thermal inversion layer detected. This is unusual. Note for Meteorology Division. Document and analyze. Hour 24. Wind speed 131 km/h. Temperature -94 degrees C. Visibility unmeasurable at surface level. Storm system showing characteristics inconsistent with standard Cassari 7 polar weather patterns. Monitoring team advises all drill leadership of potential extended storm duration. Hour 32. Wind speed 139 km/h. Temperature -101 degrees C. Thermal inversion layer collapsed. Temperature drop accelerating. Hour 40. Wind speed 143 km/h. Temperature -108 degrees C. Wind chill equivalent -157 degrees C. This is the highest wind chill recorded on Cassari 7 since the establishment of the monitoring array. Section 2.3. The Extraction Wave. Testimony: Senior Monitoring Technician Seelith Orvan, GUMA Polar Training Division. I've worked extraction monitoring for 11 years. I've seen bad drills. I've seen drills where we pulled 30–35% of the group. I've seen drills that went sideways when weather shifted unexpectedly. I've handled emergencies. I've handled situations where cadets were in genuine distress and we were working fast to get them out. I have never, in 11 years, seen what happened in Cycle 441. The first extraction was Cadet Droz at Hour 4. She was Velhari, and I remember thinking, okay, early, but she took a bad hit from the wind, and the thermals just cascaded from there. It happens. I got her stable and logged it and went back to the boards. Hour 6, 2 more extractions, both Drenosi. The Drenosi are rated to -65. The temperature at Hour 6 was -79. They held on longer than they should have, honestly, given the temperature differential. I logged them out and got them thermal support. Hour 9, 4 extractions in a 90-minute window. 2 Umathi, 1 Krelshan, which surprised me, because Krelshan have that metabolic slowdown capacity, and 1 Velhari. I called Instructor Sonak and flagged the rate. He reviewed the environmental data and authorized continued drill operation because cadets still had 48 hours of monitoring support and the extraction protocols were functioning. I understood the decision. I did not feel entirely comfortable with it. I noted that in the log. Hour 12 through Hour 20 was what I started privately calling the cascade. I'm going to list the extractions because I think the pace of it matters for understanding what was happening out there. Hour 12, 3 cadets extracted. Hour 13, 2. Hour 14, 4. Hour 15, 2. Hour 16, 3. Hour 17, 1. Hour 18, 5. That's 20 cadets in 6 hours on top of the 7 we'd already pulled. 27 total, more than half the registered group. By Hour 20, I had 26 cadets in the monitoring station. The facility was not designed to hold that many simultaneously, and my secondary technician, Meryl Yevs, was running supply logistics to make sure everyone had adequate thermal recovery materials, and I had 27 still active in the field. 26 of those 27 were showing increasing stress indicators, core temperatures sliding, cognitive assessment scores dropping, stress hormone markers spiking. One of them, one single monitoring feed, Beacon ID H53, Cadet Marin Holloway, was showing vitals that I can only describe as unremarkable. Normal. Her core temperature was 37.1 degrees Celsius. That's her species baseline. It had not deviated meaningfully in 20 hours. Her cognitive assessment score was 97 out of 100. Her stress hormone markers were elevated, yes, but they were elevated in the range that the biological profile for her species labels as activated rather than distressed. There's a difference, apparently. Humans under stress don't necessarily go into shutdown. They go into something else. I kept looking at her feed and looking at the storm data and trying to reconcile the two things. The wind out there at hour 20 was 118 kilometers per hour. The temperature was negative 86 Celsius, and her vitals were normal. I called Instructor Sonic at hour 21, and I said, "I think you need to look at Holloway's feed." He looked at it. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Is her shelter construction within parameters?" I pulled the shelter data. She had built, according to the terrain imaging system, a snow shelter approximately 2 meters by 3 meters by 1.5 meters high. The construction technique was non-standard. It didn't match any of the approved shelter templates from the survival training manual, but the structural analysis rated it as sound against the current wind loads. "What technique is that?" Sonic asked. I pulled the comparative database. The closest match in the survival manual was a cold weather shelter technique labeled as Quincy construction. The notes attached to the technique read, "Historical cold weather shelter method developed by indigenous human populations on the Deathworld Earth, used for survival in polar and subpolar conditions for thousands of years prior to the development of modern thermal technology." Sonic looked at the notes, then he looked at the imaging of the shelter, then he looked at Holloway's vitals. Then he said something I wrote down verbatim in my log because I thought it was worth preserving. "She's been doing this longer than we've been a civilization." I didn't know what to say to that. I went back to monitoring the other 26 active cadets. Section 2.4, Inside the Shelter. Personal Testimony. Cadet Marin Holloway, Human, Earth, Minnesota Region, GUMA Class Year 3. Okay, so I want to preface this by saying that I know how a lot of this looks from the outside, and I want to promise you that I was not trying to be dramatic or show off or make anyone feel bad. I genuinely was just doing what seemed like the obvious thing to do. The first thing I did when I hit the surface was find the wind. Not avoid it, find it. You need to know where it's coming from before you can do anything useful. Back home, my grandfather used to say that about weather. Don't fight it, learn it first. My grandfather grew up on the Iron Range in northeastern Minnesota, which is lake effect snow country, and he had a lot of opinions about winter that I grew up thinking were just kind of normal and later found out were, apparently, somewhat unusual by galactic standards. Anyway, I found the wind. It was coming from the northwest, which was consistent with the topographical map I'd memorized before insertion, and I started looking for a terrain feature that would give me a position where I could work without being directly blasted. I found a natural snow ridge about 300 meters from my insertion point. Good. That was my work site. I want to describe the temperature because I think some people who read this might not have a clear frame of reference. At hour 2, when I started shelter construction, it was approximately negative 71 Celsius with a wind chill pushing it below negative 100. I have never been in anything close to that in my life. Minnesota gets cold, genuinely cold, not it's a bit brisk, cold, but we're talking negative 30. Maybe negative 40 in a bad January with wind chill. Negative 71 is not the same thing. It is not even in the same conceptual category. But here's the thing about cold, it's information. Your body tells you things. Your skin tells you where the exposure is, where the heat is leaking out, what needs to be covered first. I've been cold enough that I know what the early warning signs feel like, the kind of deep spreading numbness that's different from the surface sting of wind. And at negative 71 in my thermal layer, I wasn't hitting those warning signs. I was cold. I was very cold, but I was functional. So I built the shelter. A Quincy is a simple structure. You pile snow, You let it sinter, that's the technical word for the snow crystals bonding together under their own weight, which takes about 2 hours, and then you hollow it out from the inside, leaving a thick enough wall to provide insulation. The interior of a properly built quinzhee, even in extremely cold external conditions, will stabilize around -5 to 0 Celsius just from the body heat of the occupants. That's the magic of it. Snow is an insulator. It's full of air pockets. You're not trying to generate enough heat to warm the whole outdoors. You're creating a small space that your body heat can actually manage. I piled the snow during hour 2, which meant I was working in the wind, which was unpleasant. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't unpleasant. My face was the main problem. The thermal hood covers most of it, but there's still a section around the eyes and nose that's exposed. And the wind at that speed feels like very small, very angry needles being applied continuously. I tucked my head down and worked fast and kept moving, because movement generates heat, which is the other thing about humans that I think doesn't always come across in the biological profiles. We run warm. Not as warm as some species, I know, but we run warm and we can generate a lot of heat through muscular activity. My core temperature during the physical labor of snow piling was probably 38.5 Celsius. That's slightly elevated, that's us running hot. That's useful. I let the snow pile sit for 2 hours. During that time, I ate half my ration pack. Caloric intake matters a lot for thermal regulation. Your body needs fuel to generate heat, and I had made sure my pack was loaded with high-density caloric items, which is why I'd put in the request for the confectionery items. And I reviewed my navigation tasks to make sure I could complete them when the time came. The confectionery items, by the way, they were the small marshmallows, not the big ones. I want to note that for the record because it still bothers me a little. The big ones are more satisfying to eat. The small ones are fine, they're perfectly serviceable, but there is a specific comfort value to the large ones that the small ones don't quite replicate. This is not a significant complaint. It is a real complaint. After 2 hours, I hollowed out the shelter. The sintering had done its job. The walls were solid, maybe 30 centimeters thick, and they held their shape as I worked. I dug a raised sleeping platform inside, cold air sinks, so elevating the sleeping surface even slightly keeps you off the coldest layer of air in the interior, and I made a ventilation hole in the top to prevent carbon dioxide buildup. I crawled inside. It was, genuinely, a relief. The wind dropped from screaming to a low, almost meditative moan through the vent hole. The temperature inside was already reading around -8, colder than I'd hoped, which meant I was going to need to eat more to keep my core temperature up, but workable. I activated the small thermal emitter from my survival pack. It's about the size of my fist, runs on a 12-hour cell, and the interior temperature climbed to -2 within about 40 minutes. I made hot water using the thermal element in my ration kit. I put the small marshmallows in it. It was not exactly hot chocolate. The base medium was a caloric broth powder with a vaguely sweet flavor modifier, but it was hot and sweet and I was warm and out of the wind, and I want to be honest, I was genuinely comfortable. Not comfortable the way I'd be in a heated room. Comfortable the way you get when your body has been running hard against something difficult and it finally gets a moment to breathe. Earned comfortable, the best kind. I completed my hour 6 navigation task on schedule, came back to the shelter, and slept. Section 2.5. The Collapse of the Field, Hours 2038. Testimony, Senior Monitoring Technician Seelith Orvan, continued. By hour 24, I had 37 cadets in the monitoring station and 16 still active in the field. The storm had not moderated. If anything, it had intensified past anything the meteorology team had predicted. The wind chill equivalence at hour 24 was below -135 Celsius. I had submitted 3 separate urgent weather notifications to the drill leadership team and received authorization to continue the drill, because the field cadets still had monitoring coverage, and the extraction protocols were functioning. I want to be clear that I am not criticizing Instructor Sonic's decisions. He was following procedure. The procedure is sound in standard conditions. These were not standard conditions, but I understand the logic. Hour 28, 43 cadets extracted, 10 still active. Hour 32, 47 cadets extracted, 6 still active. Hour 36, 50 cadets extracted, 3 still active. I want to pause here and describe what those last few hours looked like from the monitoring station, because the numbers alone don't capture it. The station was full. We had cadets in every recovery position, wrapped in thermal layers, most of them past the point of distress and into something quieter, the exhausted, slightly bewildered calm that comes after a major physiological stress event. Medical support had been on site since hour 12. Everyone was going to be fine, no permanent damage, the protocols worked, the monitoring system did its job, but the room felt heavy, quiet in the wrong way. And there was one monitoring feed that kept drawing my eyes back. Beacon H53. Cadet Holloway. Her core temperature at hour 36 was 37.2 Celsius. Her cognitive assessment was 95 out of 100. She had just completed her hour 36 navigation task with a timing efficiency of 94%, which is technically a high-pass score. The two cadets still active alongside her, Cadet Yuveth Delm, Velhari, and Cadet Saramil, Sonath, were showing severe stress indicators. Both were extracted within the next 40 minutes. At hour 38, the monitoring board showed 52 extractions. One active cadet remaining. Beacon H53. I called Instructor Sonic. "Sir," I said, "we have one cadet remaining, Holloway. Her vitals are nominal." Silence on the line. "The drill runs to hour 48, he said. "Yes, sir." "What's the temperature out there?" -106. Wind chill -153. Another silence. "And she's actually okay. Her core temperature is 37.2. Her nav task compliance is above 90%. She has not flagged any distress indicators in the monitoring feed." "What is she doing right now?" I looked at the field imaging data. The passive thermal imaging showed one heat signature inside the snow shelter on Sector 11, stationary. "I think she's sleeping, sir." The line was very quiet for a moment. "She's sleeping," Sonak repeated. "That's what the imaging suggests." I heard him exhale slowly. "Okay," he said. "Maintain monitoring. Keep the extraction team on standby." "Yes, sir." I looked at Beacon H53's feed for another long moment. 37.2 Celsius. 95 cognitive score. One heat signature in a small snow dome in the middle of a storm that was currently registering the highest wind chill in Kesari 7 recorded history. "Sleeping." Personal testimony. Cadet Marin Holloway continued. "I slept from around hour 36 to hour 40, which was longer than I'd planned. I think the conditions outside were better for sleep than I'd expected. The sound of the storm, filtered through the snow walls, was actually pretty good white noise. My family back home uses a white noise machine in the winter because the heating system is old and makes irregular clinking sounds, and the storm had a similar quality. Consistent, rhythmic, easier to sleep through than silence. I woke up at what my internal clock estimated as around hour 40, ate the rest of my ration pack. I'd been rationing carefully, but I'd hit the point where I needed to fuel up for the final push, and completed a shelter integrity check. One corner of the roof had compressed slightly under the accumulated snow load. I shorted up from the inside, which took about 10 minutes, and then I stayed very still for a moment just listening to the storm. It was bad. I want to be honest about that. Even filtered through the snow, I could hear the intensity of the wind, and when I made a small test opening in the door block to check exterior visibility, what I saw was essentially nothing, a white wall that was moving very fast. The cold that came through the opening in those few seconds was sharp enough to register even through my hood. I closed the door block and sat back. Here is the thing about being in a position that is objectively dangerous. Your brain is doing a lot of things at once. Part of it is running the practical calculations. What resources do I have? What is my exposure window? What are the steps? Part of it is doing something harder to define, something that is not exactly fear and not exactly calm, but somewhere between the two. A kind of focused alertness. Everything feels very clear and very immediate. Small things matter: the warmth of the mug I was holding, the sound of the vent hole, the specific texture of the snow wall I was leaning against. I finished the small marshmallows at hour 40. I ate the last few of them one at a time, slowly, to make them last. I thought about the fact that I'd asked for the big ones and gotten the small ones, and I thought, with the clarity that comes from exhaustion, that this was a small and almost comically ordinary complaint to be having in the middle of a planetary blizzard at -106 degrees Celsius. That made me laugh a little, alone in the dark in my snow shelter. I think that's the human thing, maybe, or at least the me thing. The situation was serious. It was genuinely, objectively serious. But the fact that it was serious didn't stop the small, ordinary world from continuing to exist inside it. The annoyance about the marshmallow size, the warmth of the mug, the memory of my family's porch. Those things didn't go away because the storm was happening. They ran alongside it. They were part of surviving it. Hour 42, I completed the navigation task on schedule. The wind nearly knocked me down twice. I got back to the shelter with ice crystals in my eyelashes and the exposed skin around my eyes feeling like it was being sandpapered, and I sealed the door block and sat in the warmth and thought, 10 more hours. 12 more hours, actually. I'd miscounted. That was fine. I recounted and adjusted. 12 hours, fine. I rationed my thermal emitter's second cell carefully. I did some light physical exercises inside the shelter to keep my core temperature elevated. Jumping jacks are surprisingly viable in a 2x3 shelter if you modify the arm movement. And I ran through some memory exercises, which is something I do when I need to stay cognitively sharp. I recited the periodic table of elements in order, then in reverse. Then I tried to remember the starting lineup of every Minnesota Twins baseball team from my childhood, which is a less precise exercise but more emotionally grounding. Sports statistics as a survival technique. I should put that in the after-action report. Hour 44, hour 46, hour 47. The storm was doing something different at hour 47. The sound had changed, still loud, still severe, but the rhythm had shifted in a way that felt like a weather system moving through rather than sitting. I'd noticed that pattern before during bad storms back home, the way the intensity shifts just before conditions begin to improve. Not calm before the storm, restless before the clearing. Hour 48. I looked at my mission clock. I looked at the door block. I dug through it. The wind was still significant, temperature still well below anything comfortable. Visibility maybe 4 meters now, which was an improvement. I stood up outside the shelter in the wind and breathed the cold air, actually breathed it, deliberately, the way you do after a long time in an enclosed space, and it burned a little going down, but it was air and it was open and it was the end. I activated my mission complete beacon at exactly hour 48, 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Then I went back inside the shelter, because I had learned not to stand outside in a polar blizzard longer than necessary, and I waited for the extraction transport. While I waited, I looked at the inside of the Quincy I'd built. The walls had held beautifully. The sleeping platform had not compressed. The ventilation hole was clear. It was, if I'm being objective about it, a good shelter. My grandfather would have approved. He built one in the backyard once when I was 7 to show me how it was done, and it stood for most of the winter. I thought about that a lot, waiting in the wind. He would have found this whole situation pretty funny. Section 3.2, Extraction and the Monitoring Station. Testimony, Senior Monitoring Technician Seelith Orvan, continued. I watched Holloway's beacon go green, mission complete, at hour 48 plus 2 minutes. I logged it, and then I sat back in my chair for a moment because it had been a very long 48 hours, and the significance of what I was looking at was still processing. 52 cadets had not completed the drill. One had. I sent the extraction transport with a priority flag. Standard procedure after a difficult drill is to have medical on board the transport for immediate assessment. Our medical officer, Dr. Velthasari, was on the vehicle when it went out to retrieve Cadet Holloway. Dr. Thasari's report from that extraction was brief. I have permission to quote it in full. Cadet Holloway's condition upon extraction was clinically unremarkable. Core temperature, 37.0 degrees C, species baseline. Cognitive assessment, 96 out of 100. No signs of frostbite, thermal damage, or cold exposure stress pathology. Physical presentation, alert, oriented, and in good humor. Primary reported complaint, ration pack confectionery allocation. Cadet stated, verbatim, "The small marshmallows were fine, but I really think the big ones would have been better for the hour 40 psychological checkpoint, and I'd like to formally request that future packs include the large variety." No other clinical concerns identified. Cleared for return to standard duties. Dr. Thasari told me later when I asked for clarification that Cadet Holloway had been sitting inside her shelter, playing a card game she'd constructed from pieces of her ration packaging when the transport arrived, and had seemed, in his assessment, genuinely disappointed that the drill was over. Not all the way disappointed, he clarified. She was happy to be extracted. But she said she'd been in a rhythm and 48 hours had gone by faster than she expected. 48 hours in a blizzard at negative 106 Celsius. Gone by faster than expected. I have spent 11 years in this job. I have no framework for that. Audio log GUMA Polar Training Grounds, Recovery Wing Briefing Room, Cycle 441, Month 9, Day 3, Hour 9. Instructor Sonic, I want to start by being very clear that what happened out there does not reflect negatively on any of you as cadets. The weather conditions during this drill were genuinely anomalous. The meteorology team is already writing it up as an extraordinary event, and the failure threshold for the Class 9 drill has never been designed around conditions like what you experienced. What happened out there was not a normal failure. It was a statistically improbable weather event, and your bodies responded in ways that are physiologically appropriate. You are not weak. You trained hard and you were overwhelmed by something that was genuinely overwhelming. Pause. Sonic, I also want to acknowledge that Cadet Holloway completed the drill. She completed it with scores that exceed the historical average for this exercise. I asked her to be present today, I'm not doing this to hold her up as a comparison point for anyone. I'm doing this because her after-action account has things in it that I think are valuable for all of us to hear. Cadet Holloway, whenever you're ready. Holloway, sure, okay. So I want to say first that I think everyone should know their failure was about atmospheric chemistry, basically. Like, it was really legitimately bad out there. I've been in some bad winters and that was bad. I'm not going to minimize that. Pause. Holloway, what I want to explain is the thing about cold because I think it's a framing issue more than anything. Cold on Earth, especially where I'm from, is not something you fight. You don't beat the cold. The cold wins every time if you fight it, you work with it. You understand what it's doing to your body and you manage the variables you can manage and you don't panic about the variables you can't. The snow is not your enemy. The wind is not your enemy. They're conditions. They're the environment. Your job is to exist within the environment without losing your ability to function. Pause. Holloway, the shelter is the most important thing. Once you have shelter, you have a manageable space. Everything inside the shelter is something you can control. Everything outside is not. So you do your work outside as fast as possible, as efficiently as possible, and then you come back inside. You don't extend your outside exposure time for non-essential reasons. You don't let the storm get into your head. You keep your inside space warm and your outside tasks brief and structured. Pause. Holloway, the caloric thing is also really important. Cold is expensive, physiologically. Your body is burning a huge amount of energy just maintaining core temperature. You need to eat. You need to eat more than feels normal. The ration packs are designed to cover baseline caloric needs, but in a high cold exposure scenario, you're burning significantly above baseline. I probably consumed about 30% above the standard ration pack allocation during the drill. A voice from the group. Cadet Droz, the marshmallows. Holloway, the marshmallows were part of a supplemental caloric strategy, yes. Several sounds that might be laughter. Holloway, I know it sounds weird, but simple sugars metabolize fast and generate quick thermal energy. My grandfather taught me to always carry chocolate or sugar when you're going to be out in real cold, because when your body needs heat fast-burning fuel matters. The ration pack confectionery items were a deliberate choice. Longer pause. Holloway, the last thing I want to say is it goes by. That's the other thing. When you're out there and conditions are bad, your instinct is to watch the clock, and that makes time slow down. The drill goes by faster if you give your mind something to do. I ran through navigation tasks, memory exercises, I thought about my family, I did physical movement to stay warm. Time is manageable if you fill it. Pause. Holloway, that's all I've got. I genuinely think everyone in this room could have done what I did with a different approach, and I mean that. Cadet Droz, you were sleeping at hour 36. Holloway, I was very comfortable at hour 36. The audio log records a long pause, followed by multiple sounds that are definitively laughter. Section 4.2, the medical analysis. Report Dr. Velthasari, GUMA Medical Division, Kesari 7 Station, filed cycle 441 month 9 day 5. Following the cycle 441 Class 9 Blizzard drill incident, I was asked by Drill Commander Sonic to prepare a formal medical analysis of Cadet Holloway's physiological performance relative to the other cadets' failure patterns. What follows is that analysis. Metabolic thermal regulation. Human beings as a species are endothermic, warm-blooded, with an unusually active metabolic thermal regulation system. Their baseline body temperature, approximately 37 degrees C, is maintained by a continuous metabolic process that generates significant heat output as a byproduct. This is, on its surface, not unusual. Many species maintain thermal homeostasis in similar ways. What is unusual about humans is the degree to which they can actively modulate this process through behavioral strategies. What I mean by this, when a Velhari cadet becomes cold, their body's thermal regulation system responds, but there is a hard limit on how much additional heat their system can generate. They are, in a sense, running at close to peak thermal output at all times. A human, by contrast, can significantly increase their thermal output through voluntary muscular activity, physical exercise, because their metabolic system is designed to scale. A human in sustained heavy physical activity can generate core temperatures approaching 38.5 to 39 degrees C, even in extreme cold environments, as long as adequate caloric fuel is available. Cadet Holloway's strategy during the drill, high-calorie intake, regular physical activity during shelter construction and navigation tasks, brief outside exposure, was essentially a behavioral translation of this biological capacity. She was not surviving despite being human. She was surviving because she understood how to use human physiology in cold conditions. The psychological factor. Human stress response systems are, by galactic comparative standards, somewhat unusual. Humans are what behavioral biologists classify as a high-stress tolerant activation species, meaning that under extreme stress, instead of entering a conservation or shutdown state, they tend toward heightened engagement. Stress hormones in humans, rather than signaling shutdown, signal mobilization. They become more alert, more focused, more behaviorally flexible. Cadet Holloway's stress hormone data during the drill showed the expected human pattern activation profile. She was not calm. She was, by the biochemical measure, quite physiologically stressed. But her stress response was functional. It sharpened her rather than degraded her. This is consistent with published literature on human stress physiology. I am summarizing it here because I think the implications for training design are significant. We have been designing cold weather survival training around the assumption that physiological stress and functional performance are inversely correlated. In humans, this is not reliably true. The Deathworld variable. Earth is classified as a galactic hazard class 4 Deathworld. I want to be explicit about what this means in the context of this analysis. Humans did not develop their extraordinary stress tolerance and thermal behavioral flexibility in a comfortable environment. They developed these capacities because their home planet is, by most galactic standards, genuinely hostile to life. The gravity is higher than galactic average. The atmospheric composition is aggressive. The wildlife includes numerous apex predators. The climate extremes are severe. The disease ecology is ruthless, and the humans who are alive today are descended from long lines of ancestors who survived all of it.